So what is Islamophobia? It's Islamophobia. There's two types of definition, and we haven't actually come to a conclusion, I would say, a togetherness of what it actually is in definition. So this is what we're also working to tackle. But there is two definitions that have been sort of outlined, and I'll go into that in just shortly. But first and foremost, because before the definition comes, we actually feel it more than anything. So although it hasn't been universally discussed about what it should stand for and what it is in definition, we know that we feel Islamophobia, and many people do. And so this is what I'm going to talk about. As I mentioned, Islamophobia is not just overt, something that you see attacks, where someone is wearing a hijab being attacked outside, someone is being physically abused. It's much more discreet than that. And this is a little demonstration of what we feel Islamophobia is like. So this is what people see. And actually it goes much deeper down, and this is what actually it involves. It involves discrimination, whether that is open or in much more discreet. Stereotyping, someone might not necessarily be a Muslim, someone might just be wearing a covering. We see different minority groups such as African groups that wear the head covering, even Jewish people wear the head covering, but because it's perceived as Muslimness, some people might take that and make an assumption that they are actually Muslim, and that also is defined as Islamophobia. So now we know that Islamophobia doesn't just tackle just Muslims, but also it affects non-Muslims as well in society. Also exclusion. So many people, and I think the best example of that is particularly in schools. We see there's figures as well that come with this, that the Home Office have disclosed where bullying takes place in the school playground. And one of the words that come up between these incidences is terrorist or bomb. And those are the key words that, big organizations as well as the Home Office have really described that come up in bullying. And that is directly related back to Muslims, because which child on the playground will likely be called that name? It's a child of color, whether they're brown or maybe a small child that's wearing a hijab. So that's that. And then there's also marginalization. So we know that in society, how often do we see a member of parliament that's wearing a hijab? Not so often. So essentially that's what marginalization is the barriers that prevent British Muslims from getting into certain sectors and certain spaces. And overall, that's what we feel, and that's what we define as Islamophobia. So even though it's not being exclusively defined by amongst us Muslims, we have all, one way or another, experienced either verbal attack, physical attack, or these forms of discrimination. And then I would like to get into the definition. So as I mentioned, there's two types. So it's one that has been defined by the APPG of British Muslims, which is an all-party parliamentary group. And that's a mixture of different parties. So it's Labour Party, Conservative, SNP. And they've all concluded that this is what it stands for, Islamophobia, which is Islamophobia is rooted in racism and is a type of racism that targets the expression of Muslimness. So instead of a type of discrimination that targets Muslim, it mentions this word called Muslimness. You might have heard of it, but then you might have not. So what essentially that means is that anyone that can be seen, expressively be seen, or be mistaken as Muslim. So that's one of the definitions. And then another one which goes even further in definition is one that was released by Fear Inc., which is an American journal. So all of these are very well supported in evidence. They're evidence-based definitions. And this one says an exaggerated, irrational fear, hatred, hostility towards Islam and Muslims, perpetuated by negative stereotypes resulting in bias and discrimination. And essentially that talks about all the things that we talked about. So it's not just a physical attack of what defines Islamophobia. It goes much deeper than that. It's the hatred, it's the stereotyping, discrimination, overt, covert, discrimination.